Hi everyone, welcome to our Mark's Gospel series. Today to chapter 13. Now, chapter 13 is probably the most difficult chapter to understand in Mark's Gospel. I hope that reassures you a little if you've read it and you've wondered what was going on. You'll perhaps have seen that it has a different feel to it than the other chapters. And the reason for that is it has characteristics of a certain type of literature called apocalyptic literature within it. That's the sort of literature that makes up the book of Revelation largely. And their vivid imagery teaches us truth in a different way than we're used to. Now, what causes the confusion here is that Jesus is speaking about two events, but he does so in such a way that it can be hard to work out when he's speaking about one and when he's thinking about the other. And sometimes I think of those pictures that you get of mountain ranges that look as if they're really, really close together, but actually whenever you get up to them, they're far apart. And the two events here are the fall of Jerusalem that took place in AD 70 and the second coming of Jesus that has obviously yet to take place. But these two things are conflated in what Jesus says here in such a way that it can be difficult to distinguish between them. Well, let's think of the fall of Jerusalem first of all. This took place, as we said, in AD 70. In the mid-60s, some Jews led a rebellion against the occupying Roman forces, and they were remarkably successful. They ousted the Romans from the land and they installed their own leadership. Now, the emperor at the time was Titus, and after a short time he raised an army and he besieged the city of Jerusalem. And eventually he took the city with great brutality. He destroyed the city and destroyed in particular the temple. Many people died. And in this chapter, when that is in mind, Jesus warns his followers to look out for the signs and to flee the area. So for example, in verse 14, he says, "Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let no one on the housetop go down or enter the house or take anything out." Now, it would be tempting for those who lived through those events and the persecutions which beset the early church. It would be tempting for them to think that that really heralded the end of the world. But no, the great task of taking the gospel to the nations must happen first, as Jesus makes clear. The other event in mind in this chapter is Jesus' second coming. Verses like 26 to 37 seem to refer to that. So for example, verse 26, "At that time people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and he will send his angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens." Interestingly, it seems that guesswork about that timetable is pretty futile because even Jesus doesn't know that date. That's part of the limitations that he takes on in coming to earth. So speculation is not the appropriate response, but there is an appropriate response, and it is readiness. And that's the point of the parable at the end of the chapter, where the homeowner goes off leaving his servants in charge and telling them to keep watch. Those servants need to be ready for the master to return at any time, just as we need to be ready for Jesus to return at any time. You can't help but realize that as we read this gospel, and this chapter especially, that Jesus is much bigger than we might have previously thought. He's coming back one day with angels. He's going to wrap up human history. He will be seen as Lord of all. And that makes what happens next all the more remarkable. The next chapter is actually the longest in the Gospel, chapter 14. It covers a lot of really important events. So we're going to slow down just a little and cover it in two sections. So read chapter 14 up to verse 42. It's just a little over halfway. Read chapter 14 and I'll see you tomorrow.